Okay, I think we're going live. I am John Hornsby with Hornsby Creative. We are on the final day of our first ever Freelance Business Week here in Waynesville for our Fun and Failure Friday panel discussion. And in the spirit of that, we're being adaptive in the moment and going live on YouTube. So that we can use this going forward. When you plan to do something and nobody shows up except for one brave soul, we can get creative and turn that failure into a moment of fun and something that we can leverage going forward. So that's what we're going to do here right now. First, I want to introduce our panelists or give them a chance to introduce themselves. And then we'll dig into a little casual conversation around our philosophies of fun and failure and how that relates to the work that we do. So I'll start over here with Gwen. Would you like to tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Gwen Birkenbrod-Smith, and I am the program director at Mountain BizWorks for the Craft Your Commerce program. I also am a one-on-one business coach, and I also work for the American Craft Council as their director of community and creative work.
Great. Thank you for being here. Gwen is also my business coach. So in true Aquarian fashion, I'm an Aquarian and I like to collect people and strangers and bring them together. So that's what this week has been. This is my new friend, Laura Lee.
I'm Laura Lee Garnes. I am the owner and founder of WNC Social Media Buzz. We are a digital marketing company. We help small businesses to grow online, to help them save money and streamline their marketing dollars and essentially know where they're going with the blueprint and a marketing plan for their organization.
Thank you. Laura Lee is also one of our co-organizers for the conference this week. And Ashley, would you like to share?
Sure. I'm Ashley Swanger. I'm the director here at the Small Business Center for Haywood Community College. Been happy to host some of the freelance business events here in Haywood County in Waynesville. So glad to be part of this panel. Appreciate everything that you all have done to bring this event here for this week. So look forward to that going forward.
Great. Thank you. And Shannon.
Yes, I am Shannon Quinn. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Lake Junaluska. That is a conference and retreat center here in Haywood County. We have leisure guests, we have group sales, and a lot of everything in between. So we stay pretty busy. I've been in the Asheville area for about 20 years and have been in marketing about that long. And in a sort of past life, years and years ago, I worked in freelance as a content writer and an editor.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Shannon and I used to work together in another life as well, and we definitely had lots of fun, some failures, and many successes too. So she'll probably have some good embarrassing stories about me to share. So I thought we could start off by really just talking about the concept of failure and sort of what comes to mind, when you think about that, intellectually, emotionally, when you think of failure. What does that bring up for you?
Gosh, for me, first of all, I'm not a big fan of the word failure because it has such a negative connotation. And to me, that's part of life is failing, or my definition of failure is when you don't meet your expectations, right? So that happens all the time, but that doesn't mean you're actually failing. It means you're growing and learning and adjusting and gaining skill sets to pivot and kind of life, particularly as a freelancer, things don't always go as planned. So being able to be nimble enough to make those adjustments. And so to me, I like to reframe the word into something as an opportunity to learn or an opportunity to pivot. But it definitely brings up anxiety because I'm a planner. And I like to have things go very in the structure in the way that I plan, and that often does not happen. And so learning to have that flexibility to just kind of bend with the way things change. But that anxiety is still always there when I think of people talk about failing or failure, and then it's kind of the vulnerability too, because you're being real as a human, talking about times that didn't go quite as well as you wanted them to, and that's part of being human. But we often try to spend so much time putting a different kind of face forward, and so sometimes that vulnerability can be interesting too.
Yeah, it's where that those expectations come into play if you're clinging
Yes.
to things going a certain
Desperately,
way.
very hard clinging.
Yes,
Kicking, going out, kicking and screaming.
I can't relate to that at all.
No,
At all.
not at all.
Anyone else want to share anything on?
I think just to speak to what you said, Gwen, I also don't really like to use the word failure. I think the only time you've really failed is when you refuse to accept a situation for what it is and to learn anything from that situation. That to me is a true failure. Other than that, yes, exactly what you said. It's mistakes are just an opportunity to grow and to figure out, how can I do it better next time? Or what did I do that I could do differently. So, yeah.
And I think for me, I've become very comfortable with the word failure. I wouldn't call it a failure, but I'm comfortable with it as an entrepreneur, as a freelancer, business owner. I just know that that's going to happen. And I've just become very comfortable with not doing things the way they should be done. Should I do them better? Learn how to streamline processes. The way I've overcome that is collaboration with experts. Finding people like John, like Shannon and Ashley and Gwen, and just diving into the community and the people that are in charge of other processes and figuring out how they're doing their processes. And so just like really learning from others has helped me not to fail so much. And so I'm just kind of comfortable with it now. I wasn't originally, so.
Yeah, that community support piece too, like being in community, especially with other business owners,
Right.
freelancers, what have you, because everyone is struggling with those same kind of things, and knowing that you're not alone, or being able to get that support and being like, oh yeah, you failed that way too? Congratulations, I just did that this morning, How about you, Ashley?
Yeah, I, of course, can relate to all of the things that you all have described. And I think this whole week, listening to different speakers and presentations that people have offered, I've thought about it in two ways. One, working with business owners, and how can I take these things and use them and pass along these words of wisdom to other people, like, hey, have you ever thought about it this way? Asking better questions, but then also just looking at it personally, like, well, how can I apply these things to do my job better? So I think all of us in some way work with other people to try and help them achieve their goals. And often you hear people say things like, I'm doing it all wrong. I know I'm doing it all wrong. And so a lot of it is just kind of helping people go, like, stop beating yourself up. You're fine. You're here. You're asking for help. You're getting, like, you want to do better, and that's the place to start. So helping other people shift their view around that, but then also doing that for yourself, remembering to do it. So it's easy to tell other people not to do that, be kind to yourself, give yourself credit, but sometimes it can be harder to live by that. I think I catch myself going, oh, I should have done this, or I should have done that. And and it can bring you down. So just being, I think, talking about failure more openly is a way to just shift your view of it, I guess, and see it more as an opportunity. So it's a good reminder to be in company with other people who are like, oh yeah. And, like, as a parent, like, every day I'm like, well, I don't know, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't, and then you realize, like, no parents do, like, everyone's trying to figure it out. And so, I think those lessons apply both to professional life and personal life, and
Sure.
In that way, all those relationships. So
Yeah, definitely. We had a discussion this morning with the YPA, Young Professionals of Asheville, and Joel Skeen was talking about sort of the mindset difference between like a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. If you get stuck in a fixed mindset, you're like, this is how it is, this is how I am, it doesn't change, I'm not good at this. Whereas if you adopt more of a growth mindset, you can be like, well, that didn't work, but I can try something else, I can get better at it, I can practice. And I think that type of resiliency and openness to failure as a necessary step on the journey to the whole mixed bag of failures and successes that are part of it is important. On that note, maybe we could share some examples of times where in the moment it felt like a big failure, but then it turned out to be a step on the way to something more successful. Anybody want to dig into that
I was
one
like,
first?
I have a story.
Okay.
It involves you.
Do tell.
Do tell.
So when
Do
John
tell.
and I worked together, we did signs together. We worked for a sign company, and we got a huge job working. We were going to redo all the signs for the Harris Center, which used to be the U.S. Cellular Center in downtown Asheville. So I won't bore you with all the logistics that go into creating a sign and making sure one sign gets up, but we had that whole entire venue to do. But the most important sign there was the one that you see on the outside of the building when you come into the U.S. Cellular Center, which is now Harris Center Asheville. And they were going to do a huge unveiling. I'm sure you remember there was a big press conference. They were going to take the big whatever off the sign and unveil it and turn it over as Harris. So my job was to get the sign made and have the sign installed, which sounds like it should be simple enough, except that it involves measuring and guys getting up on ladders in the rain and making sure that everything is exactly right, because if that sign gets there and it's a little bit too big or a little too small, especially if it's a little too small, you have problems. So I checked and I double checked and I sent the guys out and I got the crane booked and did all this stuff. We got the proofs in. I sent the logo off. They sent the sign back. I took it around. We all looked at the logo. We looked at I checked and double checked and triple checked the size of the sign. So the day that the sign came, I was sitting at the desk and front, I could see straight out the window there. It was a big bank of windows, and the truck comes pulling up and it's raining outside, and I look out and there is the sign in all of its glory, and it says Harris Cherokee Casino.
Oh no.
And to make things even more fun during this time of failure, one of essentially the guy who was right under the guy who owned the company was standing right there next to me. So the truck pulls up and I looked out and I just stood up and my face, I could tell, just went white. I mean, we had days to go. We were down to the wire, and immediately, I just thought, this isn't my fault. We're too busy here. They haven't given us enough this and that. I just had 20 different things in my head as to why, how could I kind of figure this out where it wasn't really me? And I just sort of took a deep breath and I thought, you know what? The buck stops with me. I'm the one who is supposed to get the sign, order the sign, have everybody look at it, make sure it was correct. It doesn't really matter that, yes, I have all these stacks of things to do on my desk. It's my fault. I'm the one responsible for it. So I turned to the boss and I said, the sign is wrong. It says Cherokee Casino and it doesn't say U.S. Cellular Center, and it's my fault. Well, long story short, they were very kind about it, sort of understood I had made a mistake. Of course, John was awesome. None of this was John's fault. And
I thought she was going to tell a different story.
Not at all. But we ended up getting the sign. The sign came in time, just sort of in the nick of time. We got it up, the press conference happened and all that. But the good thing that came from that is that I realized that, yeah, there were a lot of things going on that might not have been a good fit for me. Again, this is, John can tell you the whole, anyway, it was all cool. But I just thought, maybe this isn't the best job for me. Like maybe they were kind of asking us to take multiple roles and do different things. And it turned out great. It really kind of made me stop and think about, even though I'm super busy, even though you have a million things to do, I have to take my time and I've got to figure out how to do it the right way. And then also just to admit and just say, I made a mistake and I thought they might fire me, and they might have, but I was willing to take that. And so that's my big failure and learning experience from that.
Well, I think there's a couple interesting things there. One is that when you either are put into an environment, or as a freelancer, it's easy to create for yourself your own environment of, you never get it all done. There's always
Right.
something else. There's always more. And that can turn into lots of pressure, which can lead you to not, to make mistakes. The more that we rush, the more that we're stressed out. We're not gonna, we're engaging our lizard brain. We're not using the front of our brain. We're gonna make more mistakes. And so, that was one step in your journey that maybe, took you along the way to maybe I want to move on from here and do something else, which is what ended up happening. And, now that has led to something that I think that last I talked to you
Yes.
seemed like was a much better,
Yep, great.
life balance situation for you.
Mhm.
And then, we have to set our own boundaries of what will work for us in terms of our workload and how we manage our things. And if we're put into a situation where there's a gap there between what we're willing to do and what's being asked of us, then maybe it's time to change our situation more drastically and do something else. Leave that job, fire that client, whatever the case may be. So anybody else have a failure story they want to share?
How much time do you have? I mean, as babies, when we first start learning to walk, we fall, we fail, right? Like, I think this is just nature of being human. But I, as a freelancer or a gig worker, I ran my own glass. I was trained in hot glass, and I ran my own glass business for 7 years. And I will never forget the first time I did a festival. And I'm originally from Ohio, so it was the Worcester Art Festival. And outdoor festivals, first thing you worry about is weather, right? Beautiful weekend, sunny, great temperature, super excited to be kind of showing my glass, and I worked really hard on my displays and my tags and all my marketing collateral and my booth merchandising, and I put out my booth, and I sat there, and I sat there, and I sat there, and all weekend long I made 2 sales. And I mean, there's that moment where you're like, my work's not good enough. I'm not good enough. Nobody wants this. Nobody's going to buy this. I just spent all this time and all this energy putting all this together. And there's like this really introspective moment of like, oh my God, what did I do? Like, I quit a paid job to do this and nobody wants my work. And obviously my work's crap because nobody's buying it. And it was just that moment where you have to sit and you're like, you know what? The energy you project is also the energy that others feel. And so you really have to be aware of that. And so I, kind of had to put my big girl panties on and pull myself up by the bootstraps and kind of work through the weekend. But in my head was this chaos of like, what did I do? And what am I going to do? And, kind of really, I have an MBA. So going back and thinking about it kind of from the analytical side of business aspect is kind of like, there's a lot of things that I didn't do that I should have done. I didn't do enough research to find out what's the community that comes to that festival and what is the average price point of the objects that they buy. And I didn't know my story as an artist well enough to be able to interact with people without feeling salesy. And so like creating this opportunity to really figure out how telling your story, particularly as an artist, can be much more powerful in making a sale than trying to be like, hey, I've got this really great bracelet, or I've got these great pair of earrings, or I've got this beautiful vase. It can be really effective. So kind of having that like moment of like, whoa, this is really not the right path that I've chosen, yet I've given up so much to take this path. So I was kind of gave me this place to like really rethink not only kind of maybe the work that I make, but also kind of being really thoughtful on intentional, which is a word that is really important to me as a business owner, is this intention and things, you do things with intention. Is to like do my research on different art festivals and say like, is this my crowd? Is this going to, my ideal customer actually going to be here? Is this in the price points that I sell? Because, if everybody's buying $50 items or less and my price points are 150 and more, of course I'm not going to sell anything. So really taking responsibility. I've seen it happen a lot where artists don't have successful shows and they blame the show producers. You didn't bring the right people to me. It's our job as artists to also bring the right people to us, or to go to the place where our people are, our ideal customer is. And so that really kind of set me on this path of really kind of going, God, as creatives, this is not intuitive to us on how to run a business, how to think about our ideal customer, and how to kind of be really intentional and strategic in the way we get our work out there. So it actually really is what launched kind of my professional development. Like I teach professional development. I've taught it for the last 23 years across the United States. I've been a visiting artist at different colleges and universities to teach professional development to artists in different programs. And that is really kind of what spawned that, is that kind of realization of that failure moment. And certainly lots of tears and lots of doubt, but you kind of figure I think that's what it's about. Life's about. It's figuring out, okay, I didn't do that great. Something went wrong there. What is it? Figuring it out, and then kind of like adjusting and growing from it, really.
Yeah, it's interesting you both mentioned that. It's like human nature, and I definitely experience this all the time, and I see it in my children. Like something goes wrong, and like the immediate response is like blame.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
not me. It
Yeah.
was your fault.
Yeah.
You did this. The
Yeah.
show organizer.
Yeah.
Daddy's fault.
Yeah.
That I dropped my toast on
It's
the floor.
always Dad's fault.
So it's just good to like develop that self-awareness to like catch yourself like, this is my brain's like knee-jerk reaction, and I can see that and then choose to see that and then behave differently.
Yeah.
So that personal development piece comes in, and then you mentioned too, like there are things you can do to sort of strategize and better prepare. Do your market research, do your pricing research to try and set yourself up. Those are things that are in your control.
Yes.
Ultimately, there's always going to be a lot of things that are not in our control, and you just got to take that as it comes. But you can focus on the things you can control, research, pricing, so forth.
I think a lot of this resonates with me. I started my company with $400 and a laptop, and I was broke. I left my day job, and I just had to reinvent myself. And so I went through a lot of mindset shifts, changes. Like I was depressed, I was happy, I was angry, I was in self-doubt. And one of the biggest mistakes I made early on was not asking for help. I didn't want anybody's help. I was going to do this all on my own. And I had a vision for helping people, but I wouldn't ask for help. And so I didn't even know where the resources were for help. I didn't know about the Small Business Center. I didn't know about the SBTDC. I didn't know about the Chamber of Commerce, and I didn't investigate either. I was just on a mission. I needed to see 20 clients a week. I was going to hit their door and sell them a website and get them on social media. And that was my mindset, was this is what I need to be doing. And I was doing all of the tactics without looking or creating a vision, and then looking at the strategy and pushing myself that way into the tactics. I went the wrong direction. So that shift started, once I started collaborating about the third year, it started freeing me up and not limiting my company, and my sales started doubling, tripling, quadrupled last year. I mean, it's insane the success this little business has had in such a rural area. And like, you can make it here in Western North Carolina. It's very lucrative. You just have to do things in the right order and the right fashion and ask people for help and collaborate and just be willing to be open to others' suggestions and learning from other people's mistakes. But one of the biggest mistakes that I made was just not doing my research and not planning and being willing to get help. And once that I started changing that mentality, everything started opening up. And it's just been incredible. And the last 2 years, I have better clients. I have the clients that I want. You know, I'm not working for less than my value. And that was something else too. I was like charging people by the hour. Don't charge people by the hour. Create packages, value packed packages that give people something. Like, they don't want to pay you by the hour. They want a solution for their problem. And so that's another thing that I started doing differently, was looking at people's issues and actively listening and trying to figure out, you know, what type of plan could be put in place, instead of just throwing it on the wall and say, hey, I hope this sticks and works for you. Thank you for paying me. Because that's not really the culture of my organization either. And so I had to like really develop a culture for my organization. What does that look like? What's my vision? When I bring employees on, what do I expect? You know, I have people working remote. I have contractors. I have employees. How do I change the environment for them? They want different working conditions. Okay, what's that look like? I don't know. Ask them. And so then I started implementing it. I have an employee that likes to travel in his van. He's in Colorado. Sometimes he's designing websites on his toilet, and sometimes he's designing websites on a picnic area or a co-working space. I've rented a co-working space for him. I don't care how he works, how long he works. The goal is that you have to be 100% productive. That's it. Let people be in their being and whatever makes them work to their best ability. And the other thing is, I started realizing that I was given these tasks to people that didn't really want to do them. And it's like, if you do not like your job, you will suck at your job. And so I don't want you to suck at your job, because you represent this organization. So we start asking people, you know, what is it that you really want to work on? And please be transparent. What do you hate? Because I don't want you working on it. And so that was another shift in the way that, you know, I was looking at things, because I felt like I'm failing in this area to make these people happy and thriving. And so I changed it, and we're just doing so well. And so that's what I'm going to continue doing, is seeking out and researching, collaborating, being a part of Freelance Business Week, sitting with the experts. I mean, it's just been an incredible week, but that really just helped me personally. So.
Did you have a question? Or?
Yeah, a couple of things. When you were talking about, I was curious. So by your next show, how far had you advanced? I mean, that's something that probably you don't fix overnight.
It
but
doesn't fix overnight.
how confident were you when you walked into the next show?
Not very confident.
But you came back.
And I did come back, and actually, ironically, so the next show was in Columbiana, Ohio, which is kind of a rural town, and so Worcester was also a rural town. So my first thought was like, I'm not picking the right shows, so I was really worried about it. But what I did do is I had made a huge chandelier sculpture for a private collector, and I had asked him if I could borrow it, and I put it in the front of my booth as kind of like that attention grabber. And then I really practiced kind of telling the story of how I came to glass, because I came into glass in a very unusual way. I did not go through formal academic training. I didn't even learn in the United States. I had an opportunity to learn to blow glass in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is a really interesting story for people. And so, you know, just kind of readjusted the way I talk. And ironically, not only did I sell, I think it was $3,800 worth of glass at that show, even though it was really a show that probably didn't have my ideal client, but I also won the Best in Show award. And it was ironic. My cousin actually presented me with the award, because like he was one of the judges. And so he was like, is there a conflict here? And I'm like, maybe, but so it was interesting, just even those two shows in themselves, and just to see that difference. And so it's not overnight, it's not instant. And your story as an artist, and it adjusts as your pieces adjust, your life adjusts and evolves. But you just kind of slowly gain that confidence back. But I really, I remember telling my husband, I don't want to go to the show. I don't want to get out of bed and go do this. And he was like, it's okay. You've got to do this. This is the life of an artist. This is the reality of what you've chosen to do. So you just got to kind of jump in and just figure out how to kind of adjust. And so it's been a very slow process.
Yeah, talking about the timeline of, okay, so you've experienced failure, that it doesn't get fixed overnight, and that it takes a while to, to figure these things out and get confident. So I'm curious how long before you, in your situation doing shows, how long did it take before you felt confident?
I don't know if I still feel confident doing them. If I did one today, I haven't done them in a while, but what I did do is I really took a look at the kind of shows. So it's what's very common when you start making work is you do a lot of regional or local shows. But sometimes the work you make does not match with the clients that are coming to these regional shows. And so what I started to realize is that my work was not appropriate for the Ohio region, which is where I lived at the time. So that I expanded and started doing shows in Philadelphia and in Baltimore, and applying for the more competitive shows like the American Craft Council shows, and at the time a wholesale show that was called the Buyer's Market of American Craft, because those were my clientele. And that's where once I got into a place, and the more success you've experienced at shows, that's what builds the confidence. But then I also happened to be invited to be part of a group of women glass artist gallery exhibition, and so that boosts your confidence. And then I had my first museum collect my first piece, and so that boosts your confidence. So it's kind of as the evolution of my work and my practice, as the little things like victories like that happen, that help always boost my confidence. Yeah. But I always feel that imposter syndrome. I even felt that this morning. I just got done doing a presentation on sales strategy for a group of small businesses in West North Carolina that are trying to scale their business and are part of our Scale Up Intensive in Mountain Vista Works. And I stood up there and had this moment where I was like, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm about to tell a bunch of people how to increase their sales. So I think that imposter syndrome is something that sometimes has happened. We all carry that. And the irony is, you don't experience imposter syndrome unless you actually are a really capable individual, right? That's the irony of imposter syndrome. People who actually really aren't capable sometimes have too much confidence. And, they don't know that they're like, oh, maybe I don't know what I don't know. And so I think that that's something that I have to try to always remember. And then also, I always just am bringing my perspective to the table. So I'm not speaking the truth, I'm speaking my truth. And that's helps a little bit. But it's an evolution. It's still an evolution 27 years later.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just going to ask one more question, just
Please.
Based on some of the things you talked about. So Laura Lee, you talked about starting your own business and dealing with your own failures, and then eventually, obviously, getting some success and expanding your team. And I wonder how that translated now into accepting their failures and dealing with them and helping them through that, because
Absolutely.
that's tough as a business owner to translate what's in your head and your expectations.
It is. We've actually dealt with this recently, and so what I started doing was developing SOAPs, standard operating procedures, and talking it through with them to make sure that actually is the process. And so I make them a part of some of the decision making, so that we can avoid failure, if you will. I don't really like that term, but I'm okay with them making mistakes, because that to me is how they grow. And I've made so many. I like to think I'm a good employer and a good person to work with, because I don't really get upset about it. I just say, okay, did I fail to communicate with you the process? And most of the time, if something has gone wrong, it's because all the processes are upstairs in my brain, and I have failed to put them down on paper. So, and I've never been an employer before. So that's been interesting. There's things that you need employee handbooks. I didn't have one. You need to protect yourself as an employer. I need insurance. If one of my employees are out and they're traveling for me and they're hurt and their insurance doesn't have enough to cover the damages, I could be sued for that. So, I had to learn the ins and outs of being an employer that, I need an attorney, I need an accountant, I need all these things, and learn how to pay for those and keep everybody happy. One of the things we're dealing with now is what people expect to be paid and the environment they expect to work in. And so I'm open to that. Whether I can give them that today or not is a different question, but it's definitely on the table that it's going to happen. So I'm making them part of the processes so that we can limit the failures. But we're going to fail some. At some point, we're going to miss a step, right? Haven't done it before. It's like parenting.
Yeah.
Being an employer is like being a parent.
I mean, I like
And-
to say, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard
You're
enough.
not trying hard enough. But I'm okay with mistakes. My life that's really where the resilience comes from, is not making the right decisions. But I always get up. It was like, okay, that didn't work. So, but the biggest thing is really asking people for help. That's the game changer. And so I teach in the organization, you need to ask for help and not be afraid to ask for help.
Great, thanks.
Anything to add to that? Failure story? You got one?
Yeah, I have plenty. It's like everyone else. I think one that comes to mind, there's just it's kind of a small story, but I think it speaks to some of the things like knowing your audience, things again that for those of us who work with other businesses, like trying to teach them best practices and things like that, which is like, no, your customer's not everyone. It's not everyone age 18 to 75.
Correct.
No, it's not. So dig deeper into that. But I think I had this idea. So I started here in September. So, and the director before, I've been here for I think like 6-7 years, and had a really good rapport within the community, helped a lot of businesses. And so, and I had worked with her as well. So I was like, oh gosh, I have, like, here I go, like trying to figure out, like, should I even be doing this? I don't know, but I like it, and I'd like to think I have something to offer. Well, I had these ideas, like in my head, I was like, it would be really cool. It's a small business centers here at the Regional High Tech Center. There's this giant parking lot out, and I was like, what if we had like a pop-up shop? Like once the weather got nice, like wouldn't that be fun to do that? Like in my head, it was fun. Like I would enjoy that. That would be really cool for me.
Right.
And so then I was like, I'm going to ask people what they think. And then they were like, yeah, that would be cool. I don't have the capacity for that. Or that wouldn't help me at all. Those were the answers. No one said, oh, yes, I want to do that.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, man. So what I thought would be like this great thing that everyone would be super into, I heard back. So I was like, gosh, I was a little out of touch there. Like I didn't understand how many people are just struggling to do what they do. They don't have the capacity to go do extra things necessarily. So for some people, if they don't have an outlet for their work or their product or their service, possibly this would be helpful. But for most people, they're like, no, I don't have an hour. And if I do, I'm not taking half a day to go do this thing because it's not going to be the right fit for me because I don't even know if my customers are going to be there.
Yeah.
So I think it was a good lesson in terms of just trying to be sure that you're asking questions. And it also made me think of just that reframing in working with people and for myself as well as when something doesn't go well, when you have a failure, or with your team you have a failure, or with a client you have a failure, is trying to remember to ask yourself, what is, like, we can spend all day with what went wrong. Like you can go down that rabbit hole for a long time. Like it's easy to find the problem, like everyone can do that. So what did I learn from it? What did go okay? And what is in my control that I can try and adjust for next time? So I think even thinking about or recognizing that sometimes things don't go well and it wasn't in your control. So you have to recognize that aspect of it too. And and try and take something away from the things you can control and just let the other things go. Just let it go and kind of move your energy in a different direction. So I think you can those things too.
Very helpful.
So Ashley and Gwen in particular, you both work with, you're at Mountain BizWorks, you're at the Small Business Center, you work with lots of businesses or individuals come in wanting to start a business, they're maybe at whatever point on their journey. And so you probably see a lot of common failures. So I'm curious from that vantage point, what are some of the common failures that you see that maybe someone who might just be starting out or earlier in their journey could benefit from learning from other people's failures instead of necessarily making all of those themselves too?
Yeah, I mean, so, certainly I work with quite a lot of clients, both at Mountain BizWorks and then kind of outside of Mountain BizWorks with other organizations. And probably one of the most common things that I see, and this is probably not kind of specific to the creative community, even though that's who I typically support, is a lot of times as business owners, if we don't know or have a skill set of something, we tend to shy away from focusing on that because we just don't know it. It's uncomfortable for us. We don't have the time to put into learning. And so financials to me are by far the thing that is ignored the most and not paid attention to with entrepreneurs. And it's one of the most important things to actually pay attention to. It can really tell, like there's a story and a narrative that the numbers can tell you. There's a power in the knowledge of knowing your numbers. If you have projections and you look at your numbers halfway through the month, you can actually help make your projections for the end of the month based on increasing your marketing, increasing kind of your storytelling, and increasing the way you connecting with your customers if you're falling short. I mean, there's just so many really kind of strategic things you can do if you know the numbers. And I've worked with clients that have called me in a panic, and they're like, I just ran out of money, I have no money in my account. And I was like, what numbers are you paying attention to? And like my bank statement, and I had a bunch of money in it last month, so I decided to invest in a bunch of improvements. Well, understanding some of the basics, like just because the money's in your bank account doesn't mean that money isn't already spoken for. And then you have to understand like what kind of cash is actually coming in relative to the expenses that are going out each month, so that you understand, like, in everybody's business, there's going to be months that you're going to be more flush with cash and months that you're going to be less flush. And in the creative world, January, February, March are some of the toughest months. It's after the holidays. There's not a lot of events or activities going on. And that is not the time to spend a lot of money, because you need to kind of count every dollar and every penny. And so being open, because I think we as humans, something that we don't know, something doesn't feel comfortable, we throw up these kind of like barriers and obstacles to learning, and being open to that is kind of, that's important, is to let that go and to be open, and then to find and realize that, particularly, and I think Laura Lee were saying this, in Western North Carolina in particular, the amount of support for small businesses and freelancers is unprecedented. We have the small business centers, we have the small business development and technology centers, we've got Mountain BizWorks, we've got so many consultants that do business coaching, we've got Bird's Eye and Annie Millward Price, and so even if like something that you go and you get support from doesn't feel good to you, you're going to find someone that can have the same values you do and can help align with your philosophy and help you grow in your skill sets. And so as a freelancer and a business owner, knowing where you can get that support and how you can get that support. I remember when I first started doing QuickBooks, I actually learned by taking community college classes. So, there's just so much available to us that I think we aren't aware of or don't think of, and accessing that. And with financials, please, please, please take the time to understand and learn your numbers, and to keep your numbers in a software accounting program. While Excel or a ledger used to be okay, it really limits your ability to do like comparisons of trends and to understand your cash flows month to month. And so I would say by far the number one thing I see on a consistent basis is around financials and people's kind of resistance to learning them.
I'll just add personally that when I worked freelance, I failed to take taxes into consideration because I didn't want
Yes.
to fool with it. I was like, I'm already not making a lot and blah, 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 and I don't want to look at it and it's painful. And I failed to save those taxes. And just to be transparent, I mean, it's taken me up until probably last year to pay that. I mean, it took me a good 5 years when the IRS came after me.
Yes.
And
They
then,
will.
that sounds pretty dire, but basically you get a polite letter saying you owe us, and then you have to make a payment plan.
And I'll
but-
echo that too. Like a lot of people
Mhm.
don't set up the structure right. And I started out as a DBA and I knew better. I wrote
Mhm.
income tax software and I knew better and I did it out of laziness. And when I received my first $12,000 bill that I owed, I was like, well, that was stupid.
Mhm.
So I set myself up as an S corp, but I had this thing in my mind that, well, I can't be an S corp because I don't know how much money I'm making each month. But you can be an S corp and not pay yourself anything. And so the S corp was a great way to save money on taxes and do things the right way. And also to your point with spreadsheets, that doesn't hold up in court. So if you're using spreadsheets to document your numbers, it will not hold up in court should you ever need to go to court with the IRS or in audits. So you do need QuickBooks. And one other story I'll tell is I ended up making a $9,000 tax mistake on my return because I used to write income tax software. Oh, I can do my own taxes. Hell no. I made a mistake because I didn't handle a Schedule D item correctly, and it was going to cost me $9,000. So now that I have an accountant, I'm saving so much money every year. And they're like, hey, you're making XYZ. You need to put money in your SEP. You need to have a vehicle in your business's name and, use it specifically for business. And, all these ideas that the accountant has given me to save on taxes. And so that was something that allowed me to free up the money and move in the right direction. So there was another situation where I needed a contract with an an attorney. And I thought, well, I don't want to spend $2,000 on this contract. But you know what? That contract is saving grace. And it can be reused over and over and over. So I've learned it's important that you have an accountant, an attorney you trust, and that you have insurance. There's all these hidden costs in a business that I didn't realize that I needed. So thankfully, I know I've never had an issue. But in that first 5 years in business, I really could have been put out of business very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And I ended up owing almost $26,000 in tax by my 5th year. And I'm like, this has to stop. And I've recently paid that off, but it was hell.
It's painful.
And 26,000, dear God, some people don't even make that in a year. And I was like, this is out of control. But I was so busy doing the task and the grind and just making the company work and visiting people that I didn't have the bandwidth to deal with it emotionally, physically, and it became very spiritually at the end. But I started asking for help and I knew better. That was the thing about it, but I just let myself get in the way. So that was a pretty big failure, if you will, for me.
That's an area that I think, I've sometimes failure is like cataclysmic, like, oh crap, I owe $26,000. And then other times it's like, you don't notice it until you fix it. And then you're like, oh my God, how was that? And so in that line, like I started out as, just sole prop, DBA, all the money's intermingled basically. And I, as a family and personally, we have used, personal home budgeting software. So I had that going for me, but I was using that for everything. So I was using that for the business, and that started to run into a lot of those like, oh wait, that money's accounted for overlooks, like, oh, I got money in the bank. And my accountant who would do my taxes was always like, need to get you in QuickBooks, And I was like, no, I got my thing, it works, And then tax time would come and be like, I need your stuff. And I'd be like 6 hours going through all the spreadsheets to like figure everything out. And then like a year and a half ago, we sort of reformed as an LLC, totally separate books, QuickBooks for the business, still use, which I highly recommend, it's called YNAB. You need a budget for home budgeting software, excellent. Don't recommend using it for that and your business at the same time. But now, I'm totally clear on what's our monthly household expenses, i.e. what's my break-even point for paying myself each month for the family, and then really clear on what's, the monthly expenses for the business. So I got to add those two together. That's my break-even point for the business. And then profit on top of that. So if you're not doing that stuff, that's where you start failing on underpricing yourself, which hurts everyone, and, the other people who do what you do too, and yourself. And oh my God, the amount of time I save now when it's tax time and my accountant, press a button,
There's a report.
P&L, there you go. I've already got my other stuff. So I just saved 8 hours of billable time or time with my family that I'm not going through these spreadsheets, oh, that was for the business, that was for this, So I wish that I had listened to him a lot sooner and saved all that time and energy and clarity. Because once doing that, it's oh, what I've been charging for my hourly rate for the past year has actually only been my break-even point. Maybe I should raise my prices because that's not sustainable. You need profit, not just breaking even.
And when COVID hit, we were eligible for $10,000. I was eligible for $10,000 for a loan that was totally forgiven. And I was able to get my profit and loss statement from my accountant in less than 5 minutes. I had everything needed, and my loan was approved in 45 minutes. And the loan was forgiven as soon as it opened up for forgiveness within 7 days. And it was because of the accountant and what she had done for the company. And so you have to think about those things too, right? I never thought that I would be in that situation to need that, right? But you know how it was. All business stopped, and that helped us keep people on payroll. But if it wasn't for that step that I had taken 2 or 3 years prior, I would have been screwed out of about $10,000. So there was a lot of benefit in that. So that was an accomplishment from the failure, So I felt better about myself that, hey, I did something right. But it's important too about pricing too. My pricing structure was way off, and I was charging way less, and I didn't understand. You're undercutting people, but you're also hurting your industry when you do that. Mm-hmm. And so you think you're being wise. Oh, well, I'm going to be the cheaper one, but it's really not the best move because it hurts the industry. It makes people see less value in your product. When you're not at the right price, they're like, well, if you don't think enough about your product, why should I? And so you really need to do your research on the pricing structure too. So that was another big failure. I sold websites for $500. Okay. The market at the time probably was $2,500. And I'm like, why am I broke all the time? And I'm just barely paying to keep the operations going. So when I learned what my operation expenses were, you should have a plan for the growth of your business too. There's nothing wrong with saying 15% of everything I make is going into an account for the growth of my business.
Yeah.
And 40% is going to the IRS. And just really thinking about that, like what are those buckets of where there's just things that you can control and not control. We must pay taxes, but you must also put money aside for the growth of your business as well, or you will dry up and become irrelevant in the market. So I had to learn those things. I'm real lucky. I celebrated 10 years last month, and it's a miracle because the first year, my poor husband worked overtime every day, 7 days a week, nearly for 2 years, just so my business could make it. So he worked while I failed. And I'm like, I have to do something different. And so, again, I started asking people for help, but that was the biggest shift. And finance is so, when you say that, it's like so true. Like that's the very thing that almost put me out of business.
So another question, or something that occurred to me based on the initial conversation when you guys got started, the fact that, you're all freelancers or work with freelancers a lot, and the fact that it's by definition, typically an isolated, I'm a person, I'm my own business, and the challenges of failing as a freelancer, creative, whatever, when you don't have necessarily a support network. Hopefully you do, family-wise or whatever, but as a business person, a lot of times the rest of those folks will get it anyhow. But how difficult that is as a isolated, new, probably business person, and the challenges of getting over that and taking advantage of the community. And I'm curious about some of your experiences of kind of waking up to that and then realizing how important it is to be connected. Whether you're a freelancer, you still need to get out and about and talk to other folks and get ideas from them, that type of thing.
Yeah, the saving grace for me was joining groups with like minds on Facebook. I have a WordPress group, an Elementor group, whatever tools I'm working with, I go and find a group and then become a part of that group and answering questions and attending Freelance Business Week when invited. Thank you, John. And, I'm not turning down opportunities. I'm an ambassador for the Chamber of Commerce, huge advocate for our Small Business Center and Mountain BizWorks. Now I know a little bit more about you, but putting people in your toolbox. And that's what was the saving grace. So that's how I ended up being able to get the resources I needed. But really the groups was a game changer for me. I don't feel so isolated and alone. If I'm working in WordPress and I have an issue, I just recently took on a situation where WooCommerce has an issue. Okay, well, I know the plugin authors. And so I plug into those groups and now have a team of people. So I'm not by myself. I'm not isolated. I'm working with I call them the geniuses of the world and, finding those experts and like marrying yourself to them. Yeah. And also you have to be willing to give back too, though. Yeah. You can't just be a taker.
Ashley, I'm curious. Oh, I'm sorry. Just real quick, as a small business center, I'm curious how many freelancers or new started, businesses, whether they intend to grow and they're still, how many of them are coming to you and asking for help?
I think obviously the past couple of years, there's tons of reports out for North Carolina, but I think even bigger than that across the country, how many people have gone into business for themselves, sometimes out of necessity. I do think there's a little bit of a narrative out there that people don't want to work, right? Like the reason that everybody's hiring is because people don't want to work. And the reality is, I think it's a little bit of a red herring. Like, I think people want to work differently, and you're competing with the internet.
Yes.
Is the reality. And so people have found different ways to work. Most of them, Mike, you and I did a lot of work through COVID for different reasons, helping people. And so I lived through working for a company in COVID that completely shut down, laid off 30 people, telling them, we don't know when we're going to reopen, if we're going to reopen, nothing like that, like turned a faucet off for these people getting paid like that. And I think the past couple of years have taught us a whole lot in terms of just how to kind of look at how we make it. And so for the people who are coming in, there are a lot of people who are coming in, a lot of people who just want to know, I just need to know, how do I register for a business? I only need to know this. But then when you start asking them questions, to your point about the finances, and I think people don't, they're not, they are, it's a conversation. Talking about money makes people uncomfortable a lot of times, just in general.
Yes.
Because they either don't want to deal with the fact that things aren't going well, or they don't know the terminology, or they don't think that they do, or they don't want to ask the question because they don't want to sound like they don't know what they're talking about. And there's all this business lingo out there, and everybody's throwing around acronyms and words and financials and P&L. And I had someone say to me, like, I don't know what that is. And I think a lot of people just would, they'd be like, yeah. They don't know what it is. I'm like, you do know what it is. It's where's the money coming from and what do you spend it on? That's what it is. Like you understand more than you think you do. So sometimes it's just meeting people where they are and finding the language to connect with them to help them understand that they do know more than they're giving themselves credit for, and they have to care about these things. You can't only care about registering in your business with the county because you have to pay taxes on it. Or things like, oh, do you have your sales tax? Like I file my taxes every year. Like, no. No, that's a whole different
You're
thing.
about to pay more.
This is gonna catch up with you. Eventually, the state's gonna be like, hey there, we see you've been in business. We have not heard from you. Like that's a whole separate thing, and people are undereducated about it. And a lot of people have their business is kind of a lifestyle. Sole proprietors, people who are not set up as a separate business entity. They just do their thing. And then COVID is like, well, what happens when that just turns off? Or they're trying to avoid tax liability. And so their business doesn't really make any money, so they don't have to pay taxes. That's fine, unless you want to sell your business down the road, or you need to qualify for a loan, or
The
there's
IRS has identified you as a hobbyist instead of an
Yeah.
actual business.
Right. Or
right?
even if you make like just a little, right? Like there are things like, well, then you get a benefit from that, but it's a trade-off. There were programs for COVID relief that if you didn't make money, if you had a loss for the last 3 years, and you don't qualify. So I think helping people understand those decisions and what those decisions mean. So, there are more people I'm noticing coming in and asking, like over the past, there's a little uptick at the beginning of the year because everyone has their New Year's resolutions and they're like, I'm going to do my thing. And then people get busy, and I've noticed there's like kind of another little spike going up. So just trying to reach people through things like even this conference, like you said, I know the people are here, there are freelancers here, and that could get a lot of really good information from a conference like this, a lot of good resources and networking and learning from other people's experiences. And so sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out how to connect with those people and vie for their time, because everyone's busy. So that's another.
And I had a customer come to me just yesterday, and I gave them my attorney's name and number because they received a letter from the IRS about their 1099 contractors being questioned whether they're employees versus contractors. And I'm like, you need an attorney, like now, because you've been doing this wrong. And there's a problem because they can back charge you for all of that plus your employee. So you could lose employees over that, and you could owe a lot of tax dollars for that. So that's something to keep in mind too. When I have contractors, but they're definitely contractors. So they're not on a schedule. They don't work the same hours every week. They have their own little businesses too. So you need to be mindful of that, because just yesterday I was dealing with this with the client, and that's one of their big failures that they're gonna have to deal with. And it's just, it's not pretty.
You mentioned there's a couple things that are kind of tied together. You were talking about the community piece, and obviously COVID came up, and you were talking about the don't want to work conversation. And I think that I was having a conversation last night at Highland at our little social with a DevOps guy, and talking about, thinking about, sometimes thinks about he would, want to start his own thing, but doesn't know a lot of people and that sort of thing. And so that's sort of chicken and egg of like freelance business and community. I mean, for me, I came at it, what enabled me to be able to sort of take that leap was I had already invested like 10 years in community. So through things like volunteering, serving on boards, going out and networking at chamber events and so forth, I had been building community for 10 years before really going out on my own. And so that enabled me to have that network thing. And then especially then COVID happening and everything shutting down, that sort of pushed me back into it, because I've been on this journey that has gone in and out of, like working for myself. Oh, here's an opportunity. Yeah, will you come work for me? Sure, okay. And then that leads to another thing, and then maybe I'm back, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, going back out on my own, so it's not necessarily a static state or a one or the other. Sometimes it's a step into working for someone else or back out. But most recently, COVID came, and then I had sort of gone on that working for someone else again, and had sort of turned down the volume or the faucet to almost zero on my own work because of bandwidth, responsibilities, and concerns around competition and things like that come into play. But then COVID hit. My wife and I both lost our jobs on the same day because everything shut down. And I'm in community, as someone who primarily does design, is one of the main things I do. In community with all the designers, they're all like, I just lost half my clients. So it's like, seems like the only thing I can do is start my design business back up again. Pretty shitty time to do that, because all my design friends just lost half their clients. And so we got creative and we started another line of business doing virtual event kits and sort of combining design with product, and that getting innovative in that moment allowed us to actually do pretty well through the pandemic. But this conversation about that people don't want to work anymore, I think that COVID piece, everybody was like in this rat race in one way or another, whether you were working for someone else or working for yourself. And when like everything had to stop, people took that time to be like, what's really important, and the most important asset that we have is our time. And people don't want to work for people who don't value their time. They don't want to work for people who don't respect them and treat them with dignity. They want flexibility. Hey, I want to work out of my van and go to Colorado. Like, obviously you can't do that in a factory. Like, different industries have different needs, but that's what's, I think there's been a big value shift. It's rare that like everyone on the whole planet has the same time opportunity at the same time to be like, you know what, time is not guaranteed. Like, I could be gone tomorrow. My loved ones could be gone tomorrow. Some of us, that happened. And so maybe I don't want to get paid $9 an hour to sit in a drive-through for customers who yell at me, Maybe there's a better way.
Right.
So that's a reckoning that as a society we have to deal with. And so people who have the skills and talents and technology and community and ability to sort of set their own terms and do their own thing, I think we're seeing a lot more of that happening now. And that's part of, why I wanted to do this conference, because we've seen that kind of double since the pandemic started.
Yeah. I looked up just number of business starts through the county and the state, like just using, those little filter features that you can do and kind of look those up. And this, I haven't done it since January, but I did it from July to January, and just for Haywood County, and it was almost 400. And that was trying to kind of carve out things that were like, homeowners associations and things like that established themselves as entities. And so there's a lot of people, even if they're still working for someone else, there are people who are like, I need this plus this. I'm going to freelance. I'm going to figure out something that it's like, because people don't want to be put in a position of having all their eggs in one basket, I think too, a lot of times. So,
I can confirm that too. We got an influx of startups, and I probably built 60 websites last year, all startups. And interesting things too, and they're going to be successful at it. They're not going back. I mean, of course, there'll be some that don't follow protocol, but I try to share my failures with them and try to share my accountant and attorney and all the things that are in my toolbox with them. And I'm like, these are people you need in your life in hopes that they will succeed. But I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
That we're going to be, come back to the grassroots of our country. That's what I'm excited about, seeing people invent and create, and there's a lot to be said for that too. It's a different world than corporate.
So we are coming up on 3:30. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time, so maybe we could start to move towards wrapping things up. Are there any other questions that you want us to wrestle with from out there? No?
I have one other quick takeaway, and it's just a real quick point.
Yeah.
It came up right at the beginning, that failure is feedback. I mean, if you look at it that way, as opposed to it's a kick in the pants, or it's, it's an opportunity, it's just feedback. And that maybe takes a little bit of the sting out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that kind of clicked when you guys started talking.
Sounds like a new hashtag.
Bumper
T-shirt.
sticker, I want to do
Yeah.
bumper
Bumper
stickers.
sticker.
Yeah, can you do that?
John can.
I had somebody actually the president of the AIGA design said in a meeting once, failure is good data.
Yeah.
Same thing.
I like mine better. It's
Yeah,
And
it's a
got that
little.
It's
alliteration.
alliteration.
Yeah.
That's better hashtag for sure.
Yeah.
John can
We're
make
all
you,
starting
John
that.
can make you
Message me.
promotional material.
And I'm sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, my questions have been pretty thoroughly answered.
I'd like to address your community question, Mike, because during COVID, I think finding community was the hardest time for everybody. We're isolated in our homes. We can't gather together as individuals with groups. And so I just kind of wanted to share my story. So I lost my full-time job because of COVID. I was the executive director of a national nonprofit. I ended up working with the board to make the decision to eliminate my position because it was the right thing to do for that organization's survival. And while when I did that, I became a freelancer because I didn't have, and so I started working for Mount Visworks as a contractor. I started working for the American Craft Council as a contractor, and I started working for a company called Flourish and Thrive Academy as a contractor. And so I found myself suddenly going from kind of the health insurance, steady paycheck, into like the unknown of the hustle of being a freelancer and having to figure it out. And I was doing this in isolation, and that's really can be a challenging place. I think as entrepreneurs, small business owners, we tend to do things in isolation. As freelancers, we tend to do things in isolation. And there's a lot of opportunity to create community, but not that's not somebody's natural. I'm an extrovert, so I will seek out community. But at the company Flourish and Thrive Academy, what we realized is we are all contractors with that organization. And we have some that were kind of doing customer support, but making jewelry and running their jewelry business on the side. Some that were in like the education and curriculum development, which is kind of the role I took on, but also trying to figure out like doing one-on-one coaching for businesses and that sort of thing. And we have copywriters who kind of are hired to do copywriting and editing for artists who are trying to launch websites. And what we found is that we created our own group of community. So it's called Create a Co. I'm giving a shout out to Jess for being the initiator on that, but a group of 12 of us had come together to kind of create our own accountability group, our own community to learn from. So we meet for 2 hours every week to do work sessions or conversations and brainstorm sessions. We have lunch every Tuesday together, all on Zoom because we are spread out across the United States. And that support system has done so much for me. One of my best friends, I just met in person last October, yet I had been working with her and she's my accountability partner for over a year and a half. And so there's just this is an opportunity that if you are somebody who really struggles with finding community or is in a place where you feel not comfortable quite to meet in person or to feel that, there's ways to find that community. Laura Lee, you talked about Facebook and the groups. There's so many affinity groups on Facebook. So just thinking about ways that you can create your own community and your own system of support was amazing because we would talk about Like we have a jewelry artist who lives in St. Croix, and she had to close her gallery, and there was no tourists coming to the island, and that's what her whole business was based on that. And there'd be times where she'd just cry, and we would just support her. And we had another jewelry artist out of Duluth that was like, I'm going to open my own gallery in the middle of COVID, and we were all like, are you crazy? But she did it. And then Jess also opened her own gallery in the middle of COVID. And so like to see this kind of evolution of how people in this group and community that we kind of formed together has evolved and supported each other. It's just really, I mean, it was my survival for 2 years, really, to have that support. So don't forget, you can create your own community if you can't find one that fits and feels good to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Anybody else have any closing thoughts they want to share?
I mean, I think my closing thoughts would just be to, first of all, to, just always face reality. Byron Katie is an author who I love to read, and she said, if you argue with reality, you're going to lose, but only 100% of the time. And
That's awesome.
And so to, first of all, to face reality, and it's difficult, like we talked about with the finances and with me with the taxes, and to make a plan from that, but to do everything that you do with compassion for yourself and for everyone else. I have a saying myself, and that is, nobody is that awesome. And that sounds kind of harsh. I'm not that awesome. Nobody is. Like, nobody has all the answers. And so you also know you don't have all the answers either, but if you keep showing up and you keep being consistent and you keep just trying your best to be smart about things, and again, to look at yourself with compassion, it's not going to be easy all the time, but I think you're going to have a better time of it, and you can work some fun into that. I don't know that we've talked about fun a whole lot.
Really get into the fun. That's right.
Again, I'm sort of a quote person. Anne Lamott has this great quote, and I'm going to totally pulverize it, but it's something about, people who are trying to step on stones, every stone perfectly, which is what I try to do, you're so concentrated on stepping on that stone and doing it perfectly. And she said, while people who aren't really paying attention usually have a lot more fun. So again, there's a balance. You can't just go haywire and not pay attention, but at the same time, like, don't worry about messing up so much. Just try to do it all with a sense of humor.
And I think we should touch on fun a little bit. I think the fun for me has just been being in control of my time and having that freedom. My husband calls and you want to go to lunch? Absolutely. Hey, I'm off for 2 days this week. Can you rearrange your schedule so you could be off? Absolutely. Take my vacations when I want to. That has been, to me, the real driver of wanting to be on my own and an entrepreneur, is being in control of my life and my free time. And it's been fun. We bought a side-by-side and, couldn't get to one of the days at Freelance Business Week due to Asheville's traffic. So I turned around, went home. Hey, babe, come home. We went riding up Max Patch with the side-by-side. It's the best day I ever had. But I could do that because I'm in control of my schedule and my time. And I think that was one of the biggest things for me that made me want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, fun is super critical. I mean, it's like, especially when like things are hairy, like you could either laugh or cry, right? And so, I mean, we used to have a lot of fun working together. We had a lot of stress, and you got to be able to just like be silly, laugh at it, which can be harder to do when you're by yourself.
Yeah.
So that's where that community piece comes in, or just, I mean, I even just started like listening to stand-up comedy when I'm washing the dishes at night because I needed to just like have something funny, I just needed to laugh, and I didn't have anyone else to laugh with.
Or your bunny costume.
Or that's from a few years ago. But dress up in a pink bunny costume for your son's birthday party, because why not?
You can.
It's fun.
Yes. I enjoyed that, by the way.
That was a picture I sent around on Easter this year. But I think, having a sense of humor, failure and fun can be two sides of the same thing, depending on how attached you are to your expectations and how willing you are to laugh at yourself. And sometimes things get so bad, it's like, it is almost kind of funny. It's like, if I was watching this happen to someone else on a TV show, it'd be called comedy, you
Yeah.
know, but
I'd
it's
make a good
tragedy when it
sitcom.
happens to me. you know?
Especially like when you're a dog with the tail running around chasing the tail. We do that a lot. And it's comical. Painful, but comical.
Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else want to say anything before we?
I don't think so. Just
Okay.
this has been fun. It's been
Yes,
fun to
this
talk
has
with
been
everyone.
fun.
It's been a very good community experience, getting to meet people, some for the first time in person that I, like a lot of others have seen a lot on camera or emailed with or whatever. So that has been nice, and just in terms of building that community and laughing a lot at whatever may have happened during the week, or just kind of just remembering to do that, I think is important. Just remembering to laugh, to not maybe take yourself too seriously, so that other people can get that from you as well, that you can kind of share that energy. Just like, it's going to be fine. You gotta kind of figure out how to take the failure as feedback, and then figure out how to just laugh sometimes, so that you can end your day like this beautiful day. Go out, enjoy some sunshine on Earth Day, where it's 75 and sunny, and finally spring here in the mountains. So.
Well, on that note, then we'll wrap up. And it is a beautiful day. It is Fun and Failure Friday, and we are wrapping things up later this evening at Franny's Farm for those who can join us. That is all about fun. We're not going to have a bunch of programming. Francis Tacey, the owner of Franny's Farm and Franny's Pharmacy, will be saying some words, speaking, and we might say a couple more things, but mostly it's come together. We'll have a few free beers to throw around, and there'll be a food truck, and it's beautiful weather. Bring the friends, bring the family, and if not, go do something else that you think is fun. And that's it.
All right, thank you.